I don't know how many days we've been in this enclosure. Actually, let me think. Friday? It's almost a week. It's almost been a week. So we're not allowed to go to this beautiful beach here. We're not allowed to go in. And I'm preparing for a yoga session. And I've promised myself and others to do Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell because it was listed in my book of feminist writing or empowerment, which is this. Okay, so a little bit about Margaret Mitchell. She was born in Atlanta, Georgia, the daughter of an attorney. So she had a very high status. They're interested in American history, and she grew up in an atmosphere of stories about the Civil War. So this book was a record bestseller, was her only published work. She died in 1949. And there was a big controversy after George Floyd's uh, explosive incident where people in the US started these riots about the horrible killing of George Floyd. And then people started to try to take down monuments, like from the Civil War, of people that were in the Confederacy, of generals of the Confederacy, of people that used to own slaves. And I really think it could have been a very powerful movement had they been able to achieve it in a democratic way. My question is, why, if you live in a democracy, you can't vote to destroy those monuments? I mean, surely there are laws in the US that are against racism, and, you know, and so I would think it should have been possible to do it without violence, you know? So, Gone with the Wind, I started to read. It's beautifully written. It's very long, I guess most people would prefer to watch the film. And 1985. So going back to the George Floyd incident, they wanted to, I don't know if they succeeded. I really have to research it to not that Gone with the Wind, the film was taken off Netflix or some other provider, and the film has some depiction of African Americans in a derogatory way, but you have to understand that what she tried to do in this book is to depict it. It's an historical novel. She is describing a very important time in American history, maybe the most important time in American history, the Civil War, that still impacts America and therefore the world today. While the United Kingdom released slaves decades before, I know when I was in the Caribbean, there are islands where slaves that were liberated by the British found a new home. So England already let go of their slaves, while the US, in America, they used the slaves in their various industries. Cotton, is very famous. And they had free labor. Imagine having free labor, not having to pay, just paying them a little bit of food and treating them as objects. And in this book, it's not supposed to be a depiction of an ideal situation. And Gone with the Wind is not about an ideal situation. It's just the way things were. And it's very important for us to know where this racism starts from, where it begins. This is why we study history, isn't it? So it's a beautiful film. It's a bit sad because the actress that plays Scarlett O'Hara was a very, very sick woman with a lot of problems in her life, Vivian Lee, and very beautiful actress with a very tragic life. And there's just so much drama. Clark Gable, Vivian Lee, and that famous quote, frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. And so I managed to read one chapter, and it was really difficult, but it was beautiful language, so I'll read a bit to you. Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charm as the Tollerton twins were. In her face were too sharply blended the delicate features of her mother, a coast aristocrat of French descent, and the heavy ones of her florid Irish father. But it was an arresting face, pointed of chin, square of jaw. Her eyes were pale green without a touch of hazel, starred with bristly black lashes and slightly tilted at the end. Above them, her thick black brows slanted upward, cutting a startling oblique line in her magnolia white skin. That skin so prized by southern women and so carefully guarded with bonnets, veils, and mittens against hot Georgia suns. Seated with Stuart and Brant Tarleton in the cool shade of the porch of Tara, her father's plantation, that bright April afternoon of 1861, she made a pretty picture. Her new green flowered muslin dress spread its 12 yards of billowing material over her hoops and exactly matched the flat-heeled green Morocco slippers her father had recently brought her from Atlanta. The dress set off to perfection the 17-inch waist, the smallest in 3 counties, and the tightly fitting basque showed breasts well matured for her 16 years. But for all the modesty of her spreading skirts, the demureness of her hair netted smoothly into a chignon, and the quietness of small white hands folded in her lap, her true self was poorly concealed. The green eyes in the carefully sweet face were turbulent, willful, lusty with life, distinctly at variance with her decorous demeanor. Her manners had been imposed upon her by her mother's gentle admonitions and the sterner discipline of her mammy. Her eyes were her own. On either side of her, the twins lounged easily in their chairs, squinting at the sunlight through tall mint-garnished glasses as they laughed and talked, their long legs booted to the knee and thick with saddle muscles crossed negligently. 19 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, long of bone and hard of muscle, with sunburned faces and deep auburn hair, their eyes merry and arrogant, their bodies clothed in identical blue coats and mustard-colored breeches. They were as much alike as 2 bowls of cotton. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted down in the yard, throwing into gleaming brightness the dogwood trees. There were solid masses of white blossoms against the background of new green. The twins' horses were hitched in the driveway, big animals red as their master's hair, and around the horses' legs whirled the pack of lean, nervous possum hounds that accompanied Stuart and Brant wherever they went. A little aloof, as became an aristocrat, lay a black-spotted carriage dog, muzzle on paws, patiently waiting for the boys to go home to supper. Between the hounds and the horses and the twins, there was a kinship deeper than that of the constant companionship. They were all healthy, thoughtless young animals, sleek, graceful, high-spirited. The boys as meddlesome as the horses they rode, meddlesome and dangerous, but withal sweet-tempered to those who knew how to handle them. Although born to the ease of plantation life, waited on hand and foot since infancy, the faces of the 3 on the porch were neither slack nor soft. They had the vigor and alertness of country people who had spent all their lives in the open and troubled their heads very little with dull things and books. Life in the North Georgia county of Clayton was still new, and according to the standards of Augusta, Savannah, and Charleston, a little crude. The more sedate and older sections of the South looked down their noses at the up-country Georgians, but here in North Georgia, a lack of the niceties of classical education carried no shame, provided a man was smart in the things that mattered, and raising good cotton, riding well, shooting straight, dancing lightly, Squiring the ladies with elegance and carrying one's liquor like a gentleman were the things that mattered. In these accomplishments the twins excelled, and they were equally outstanding in their notoriously inability to learn anything contained between the covers of books. Their family had more money, more horses, more slaves than anyone else in the county, but the boys had less grammar than most of their poor cracker neighbors. It was for this precise reasons that Stuart and Brant were idling on the porch of Tara this April afternoon. They had just been expelled from the University of Georgia, the fourth university that had thrown them out in 2 years, and their older brothers, Tom and Boyd, had come home with them because they refused to remain in an institution where the twins were not welcome. Stuart and Brant considered their latest expulsion a fine joke, and Scarlett, who had not willingly opened a book since leaving the Fayetteville Female Academy the year before, thought it just as amusing as they did. "I know you two don't care about being expelled, or Tom either," she said, "but what about Boyd? He's kind of set on getting an education, and you two have pulled him out of the University of Virginia and Alabama and South Carolina, and now Georgia. He'll never get finished at this rate." "Oh, he can read law in Judge Parmelli's office over at Fayetteville," answered Brent carelessly. "Besides, it don't matter much. We'd have had to come home before the term was out anyway. Why? The war, Goose. The war's going to start any day. And you don't suppose any of us would stay in college with the war going on, do you?" "You know, there isn't going to be any war," said Scarlett, bored. "It's all just talk. Why, Ashley Wilkes and his father told Pa just last week that our commissioners in Washington would come to an amicable agreement with Mr. Lincoln about the Confederacy. And anyway, the Yankees are too scared of us to fight. There won't be any war, and I'm tired of hearing about it." "Not going to be any war?" cried the twins indignantly, as though they had been defrauded. "Why, honey, of course there's going to be a war," said Stuart. "The Yankees may be scared of us, but after the way General Beauregard shelled them out of Fort Sumter day before yesterday, they'll have to fight or stand branded as cowards before the whole world. Why, the Confederacy—" Scarlett made a mouth of bored impatience. "If you say war just one more time, I'll go in the house and shut the door. I've never gotten so tired of any one word in my life as war, unless it's secession. Pa talks war morning, noon, and night, and all the gentlemen who come to see him shout about Fort Sumter and the States' Right and Abe Lincoln till I get so bored I could scream. And that's all the boys talk about, too. That and their old troop. There hasn't been any fun at any party this spring because the boys can't talk about anything else. I'm mighty glad Georgia waited till after Christmas before it seceded, or it would have ruined the Christmas parties too. If you say war again, I'll go in the house." She meant what she said, for she could never long endure any conversation of which she was not the chief subject. But she smiled when she spoke, consciously deepening her dimple and fluttering her bristly black lashes as swiftly as butterfly wings. The boys were enchanted, as she had intended them to be, and they hastened to apologize for boring her. They thought none the less of her for her lack of interest. Indeed, they thought more. War was men's business, not ladies', and they took her attitude as evidence of her femininity. Having maneuvered them away from the boring subject of war, she went back with interest to their immediate situation. "Why did your mother say about you two being expelled again?" The boys looked uncomfortable, recalling their mother's conduct 3 months ago when they had come home by request from the University of Virginia. "Well," said Stuart, "she hasn't had a chance to say anything yet. Tom and us left home early this morning before she got up, and Tom's laying out over at Fountains while we came over here. Didn't she say anything when you got home last night?" "We were in luck last night. Just before we got home, that new stallion Mom got in Kentucky last month was brought in, and the place was in a stew. That big brute. He's a grand horse, Scarlett. You must tell your pa to come over and see him right away. He'd already bitten a hunk out of his groom on the way down there, and he trampled two of Ma's darkies, who met the train at Jonesboro, and just before we got home, he'd about kicked the stable down and half-killed Strawberry, Ma's old stallion. When we got home, Mom was out in the stable with a sack full of sugar, smoothing him down, and doing it mighty well, too. The darkies were hanging from the rafters, pop-eyed. They were so scared, but Ma was talking to the horse like he was folks, and he was eating out of her hand. There ain't nobody like Ma with a horse. And when she saw us, she said, "In heaven's name, what are you four doing home again? You're worse than the plagues of Egypt." And then the horse began snorting and rearing, and she said, Get out of here. Can't you see he's nervous, the big darling? I'll tend to you 4 in the morning." So we went to bed, and this morning we got away before she could catch us and left Boy to handle her. So it goes on and on, describing Beatrice Tarleton. Now I have a phone call. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Gone with the Wind, the descriptions of the darkies and the way they speak and the way they accept the fact that they're being owned by people and treated less than animals. Not that animals should be treated badly, but it's just it's just an example for me of a situation where you accept a situation because it benefits very wealthy. And this is what's happening around me too. We accept certain situations and we don't fight back. We don't demonstrate anymore. We don't do things. And the way women are made to please men is also something that hasn't changed. How is that? How is this changing at all in this world? If you look at Netflix and the TV series and how women, like even the Crazy Girlfriend, how the main goal of this woman is to get a man to love her or to be with her or to marry her. I mean, this is 2020, and this book depicts situation in 1861, and it's still the same. Still, women make men the center of their life and the purpose of their life, even if they're educated. And it's just ridiculous. And even the situation between the South and the North is still the same in America in some ways. There's such a big difference in politics in America between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and you wonder why this system still exists when it's so bad and doesn't contain the rainbow of political opinions. Why are there two figures? We always have these two extremities. So it seems that still the world insists on working with dramatic extremes. North and the South, the Democrats and the Republicans, and in Israel, the very wealthy and the ones that are struggling, or all sorts of people in society that don't have an easy time with people that just have it too easy. So you really wonder how that works. And so I'm fascinated by the Civil War. I'm really interested in how people that live in the same country can have such deep divide. And I think in Israel we also have a very deep divide, but it's not the same because we are not colonists as much as people like to present us as such. So this is my personal view of Israel. We cannot compare it to the US, we cannot compare it to South Africa, we cannot compare it to any country that took over land because it's not the same situation. And it's also a very, very small amount of land. So it's in no way serves as a colony because we do not have a country like there's no UK or Holland or some country that's sending people over to colonize a piece of land. So you cannot even, it irritates me when there's even a comparison. But there is a problem here in Israel that there is a big divide and it grows deeper and deeper because that's what our leader wants. And we cannot blame him for everything, but we still are very much with the same ideas, and there are still a lot of racism, and still people with dark skin are being treated very differently than people without dark skin. It's still more difficult for them. And women, even though they're 51% of the population on the average, a lot of them are still brainwashed and socialized. Brainwashed, socialized can be used, depends on which term you prefer. let's say socialized, because brainwashed is a little bit violent. So the subtle socialization of women into thinking that to be married is the most important goal of your life, and to having kids, to raise families is the most important thing. So we have strong characters in just this one chapter of Gone with the Wind. We have the mother of these boys who has a lot of power. They're scared of her. She's a very strong character, and she's the one who's running the show. She's managing a plantation, and she's trying to treat the African Americans in a nice way, a more humane way, but still, no one wants to be owned and objectified. But so many generations of African Americans actually were born into this reality. And it took so many years after the Civil War, specifically 100 years after the Civil War, the achievements of the Civil War were still not implemented, and the African Americans still did not have the rights, the basic rights to vote and to have a representation. And then we came to the big moment where Obama became president, and everybody thought the Messiah came, and then we realized that no, he did not. And sadly, such an intelligent man did not manage to bring America to a better place, I think, because I don't know if anyone could. I think the whole idea of America has become very controversial, and there's so much in all these countries that took over land. There's just so much controversy. There's so much racism, even though they're all the people that are there are descendants of immigrants. There's still so much racism. It's different if you're in Europe and the people have not immigrated from anywhere. They were just there from I don't know, from the days of the caveman maybe. And even though there's evidence that the first men came from Africa, so everybody's immigrants from Africa, there's still so much struggle, and people make such a big deal about the color of one's skin, and there's so much power given to certain people because they have a certain statue. I still don't understand why there's royal families at all, even though we're no longer in the Middle Ages. Why are there people that are being given certain statues just because they were born? That's very wrong. I think that should be completely I think they should just end any sort of royal birth. And then there's a big struggle of people to be not treated differently because of the color of their skin or their ethnic origin, and that's going to take a lot of strength. And the question is, how is that ever going to begin? I don't know. So I'm going to be reading Gone with the Wind. This is the first chapter. It's just an introduction. I love the way she describes the characters. I think she's a very gifted writer. And I think really a lot of people misunderstood what the whole idea of Gone with the Wind was all about. It's not to promote racism. It's not to say, oh, this is the good old South, but quite the opposite. It shows you how things were used to be and still are. If you look at the Crazy Ex-Girlfriend and you see Scarlett O'Hara, it's very similar type. Scarlett O'Hara is she has a lot of problems. She's really cannot see anyone. She just sees herself. Initially, she's like, she doesn't want to see anything besides herself. She's very focused on herself. And her goals is to manipulate a man to marry her. And the way she's, she takes pride in her little waist, this tiny waist. It's just scary. So I think in the South, everybody was slaves. The whites were slaves also to certain particular ideas, and the women for sure were slaves. And when you own slaves, you are also a slave, because you don't see beyond your very particular narrow-minded view. Anyway, I'll continue this reading another time because I'm going to do some yoga. It's very nice here. I feel a lot of times we don't realize how society is already it's already a sold game. You think you have freedom, but you don't, because of history, because of various factors. A person without a lot of wealth has not a lot of power in society, and women are also enslaved to the ideas that they cannot survive without a man, where in fact the female gender is the stronger one biologically. In terms of surviving, women live longer, they overcome disease longer, and yet they're treated as though they're not worth anything unless they have a man standing next to them, even though men don't live as long. So eventually a woman who's married will find herself a widow, I guess, most likely, statistically. And yet a man who's not even fit considers himself a great catch if he has a lot of money. This is what really is funny for me, that a man who's like quite old, even like Donald Trump, can think that he's a great catch just because he has money. That this is what is the source of power in society. And if a man has wealth, then he can get whatever he wants, or so he thinks. This is why I think education is so important, because if we know history, if we know the powers, the forces that are working behind society, we can be less manipulated by it. Because so many people that are uneducated are easily manipulated by manipulative politicians. So, yep, Gone with the Wind. I will continue it later on. Peace, light, and love.